Okay, Diviciacus continues. He says, apparently, quote, "If my words come to the ears of Ariovistus," he concluded, "I do not doubt that he will inflict the most inhuman punishment on all the hostages he has in his power. But your great prestige, the recent victory of your army, and the terror of the Roman name could deter him from bringing fresh German hordes across and protect all Gaul from his depredations." That's the end of his little speech. Caesar himself continues his narrative, saying, "When Diviciacus had finished his speech, the whole deputation began with many tears to implore Caesar's aid. He noticed, however, that the Sequanian representatives did not follow the example of all the rest, but hung their heads in dejection with their eyes fixed on the ground." Remember, this is the people that had invited Ariovistus in the first place. "In astonishment, he asked them the reason for this behaviour, but without making any reply, they maintained their attitude of silent dejection. After he had questioned them repeatedly, without being able to get a word out of them, Diviciacus spoke again. The lot of the Sequani, he explained, was even more grievous and miserable than the rest, because they alone dare not, even in secret, complain or beg for relief. They stood in terror of Ariovistus's cruelty, even when he was far away, just as much as if they were in his presence. For while the others could at any rate flee away out of his reach, the Sequani, having admitted him into their midst, and allowed all their towns to fall into his power, must submit to any atrocities he chose to commit against them." So the Sequani are in a tight spot. They're so scared of Ariovistus that well, it's funny actually, isn't it? They did dare turn up to this meeting, this summit with Caesar, but when they're actually there, they dare not actually say anything. I suppose lest spies report back to Ariovistus. Ariovistus must have been a terrifying figure, that they dare not even sort of meet Caesar's eye, let alone explicitly say, "Please help us, please relieve us from this tyranny." So they're sort of truly cowed. Caesar goes on, quote, "On receiving this information, Caesar reassured the Gauls and promised to attend to the matter, adding that he had great hopes that the privilege he had secured for Ariovistus, as well as the weight of his authority, would induce him to cease his oppression. He then dismissed the meeting. In addition to what he had been told, many other considerations convinced him that this problem must be faced and some action taken." So here again, people have argued all about whether Caesar really had to, because Caesar's going to go on and have, a fight with Ariovistus. People have said, no, if Caesar really wanted to not do that, he could have done. If he wanted to be what today we might call an isolationist, or if he just wanted to play it safe, he could have said, "Look, guys, Gauls, dear Gauls, sorry, can't help you. We've got to look after our own here. The borders of Transalpine Gaul are the most important thing, and I'm going to shore that up, and you're on your own. You shouldn't have invited Ariovistus in the first place, sorry." Like, he could have done that. He didn't have to take the view that it was absolutely in his best interests to immediately fight Ariovistus. But I don't know, who knows? It's impossible to really say. It is an interesting historical debate or argument, because both sides of that argument are fair enough, aren't they? I suspect that later in the story, it is Caesar unnecessarily expanding his conquests, but that this one, at least, my feeling has always been that at least the Ariovistus affair is legit. When I carry on reading and tell you exactly how it all plays out, I think you'll probably agree. Like, Ariovistus was very aggressive, and sort of wouldn't accept Roman authority in any sense. Even when Caesar tries to be reasonable with him, basically, he doesn't really accept it. And he seems like he does seem like a problem. Genuinely, truly, that Caesar, it probably was in Caesar's tactical, if not strategic, interest to take him on immediately. But anyway, people argue about that. Caesar goes on. "The most important was the fact that the Adui, who had frequently been styled by the Senate brothers and kinsmen of the Roman people, were enslaved and held subject by the Germans, and the Aduan hostages were in the hands of Ariovistus and the Sequani, which, considering the mighty power of Rome, Caesar regarded as a disgrace to himself and to his country." See, the Adui, the people more in central Gaul, were, full allies, really, of Rome. And so, you can abandon your allies, right? There's precedent for that all throughout history. You can abandon them, but it isn't very honourable. Classic thing reminds me perhaps of World War One, where the English or the British had promised the Belgians that we would help protect them from German aggression. And then when that German aggression came, a lot of historians, including Godfrey Bloom and myself, agree that probably the best thing to do was abandon them. From our point of view at that point, it was a fait accompli. The Germans had sort of effectively already invested them and conquered them. This is in World War One, at the beginning of World War One I'm talking about here. It was already too late for a start. Secondly, it was just massively not in our interest to do it. I mean, it's pretty scummy to tell someone you'll protect them and then you don't. Okay, that is dishonourable. But then there's the realpolitik side. There's the reality of things. Are we going to basically destroy ourselves in order to uphold a gentleman's agreement that is already out of date, that is already broken beyond all recognition? Well, anyway, Caesar, quite rightly, in the ancient mind, or in the pre-modern mind, they've accepted the Adui as brothers and kinsmen of the Roman people. So that's quite close. At this point in Roman history, before you're swallowed up as a full-blown colony or province, that's the best you're going to get. That means the Romans have sort of got your back, right? They've vouched for you. So the fact they've been overrun by the Germans, Caesar does feel himself honour bound, and he's not lying, right? He's not just making that up as an excuse to continue conquest and personal glory. That is fair enough and legit. Okay, he continues. Furthermore, if the Germans gradually formed a habit of crossing the Rhine and entering Gaul in large numbers, Caesar saw how dangerous it would be for the Romans. If these fierce barbarians occupied the whole of Gaul, the temptation would be too strong for them. They would cross the frontier into the province, Transalpine Gaul, right at the south of France, as the Cimbri and Teutoni had done before them. If you remember in my episodes about Marius, back in the years sort of 109 to 100, or 108, 109 to the year 101 BC. So 60, 70 years before this, a good generation before this, almost two. That's exactly what had happened. Loads and loads of German tribes had kept coming across the Rhine, completely infested France, and even Spain, parts of Spain, and then had tried to cross the Alps. Do you remember? And Marius had been sent to stop them, and had succeeded, but it was a pretty bloody affair, and it was touch and go for a while. That was the Cimbri and the Teutoni, if you remember. And Caesar said that they had marched on Italy, for the Roman province lay just across the Rhone from the territory of the Sequani. This danger, he considered, must be provided against immediately. Moreover, Ariovistus personally had behaved with quite intolerable arrogance and pride. End quote. So yeah, it becomes clear, Caesar hasn't told us about it in any detail yet, but it becomes clear later that Caesar and the Romans must already have been in contact with Ariovistus, back and forth messengers, and that Ariovistus was haughty, or rather, he just didn't think he owed Caesar anything. It seems like he wasn't scared. Well, we'll get into exactly the degree of whether he was or wasn't scared of Caesar and the Romans, but he certainly wasn't scared of them enough that he would just completely bend the knee, just completely give in to what they say. I mean, because in centuries to come, some kingdoms just completely give in to Rome without a fight. Rome turns up on their borders with a legion or two, or 10, and there's no battle. They just say, okay, fine, make us a province. We're happy to accept that. There's some kingdoms where even when the king dies, in his will, just bequeaths his kingdom to Rome. The king of Pontus is an example of that, but there are lots of them, quite a lot of them. Even though Rome is sort of a Mediterranean spanning empire, after they defeated Carthage and after they defeated Macedonia and after Pompey's successes in the east, which have already happened, if you remember, that's already happened. Rome is sort of the preeminent power in the world, but they're not undefeatable, right? They can lose if their generals are not up to the job. I guess Ariovistus was hoping Caesar wasn't as great as he might already seem. But Ariovistus just isn't cowed by Caesar and the Romans. He thinks he can take them on and win. But Caesar continues by saying, quote, accordingly, Caesar decided to send envoys requiring him, Ariovistus, to select for a conference some place lying between their present positions, as he wanted to discuss business of state of the highest importance to both of them. To this delegation, Ariovistus replied, if I wanted anything from Caesar, I should go to him. If he wants anything from me, he must come to me. Again, that's very haughty, or pretty haughty from Ariovistus, don't you think? I mean, maybe it's haughty, maybe it's brave, maybe it's foolhardy, but it's quite ballsy. You know, he's just seen what he's done to the Helvetii. He knows this guy was great in Spain. He knows the Roman legions are a finely honed machine, a well-oiled machine. And yet he says, no. Caesar says, come on, let's have a summit. And he's like, no, come to me if you want to talk to me. How about that? Caesar goes on, Ariovistus added that he dared not come without the protection of his army into the part of Gaul occupied by Caesar. He doesn't trust Caesar either, doesn't trust the Romans. Because the Romans, when they want to, can be very perfidious. The Romans certainly aren't above a double cross or a dirty trick or just murdering you when you've come to parley, which is, fair enough. They sort of pretend they are above that sort of thing, but quite often they're not. So Ariovistus dare not come into Roman territory without the protection of his army, and that to concentrate his forces would mean making elaborate and troublesome arrangements for provisioning them. He could not imagine what business Caesar, or the Romans at all for that matter, had in that part of Gaul which was his by right of conquest. So I mentioned the right of conquest earlier, didn't I? In Ariovistus' mind, he's like, this is my land. I won it fair and square. I see what you're doing. Don't pretend you're coming for a parley and that we can speak about it. I see you, Caesar, and this is my land. And if you're going to come and take it, if you want to come and take it, well, do that. But don't pretend you're trying to be reasonable with me or that I am the bad guy. I mean, in hindsight, that neither Caesar nor Ariovistus are particularly good guys. But it seems like Ariovistus, in my mind, in most people's minds, is more of the bad guy. But he's saying to Caesar, like, don't make me out to be the bad guy. I'm not the bad guy here. I won things fair and square. That's fair. Caesar goes on. At this, Caesar sent a second embassy to remind Ariovistus of the important privilege conferred upon him by himself and the Roman government when, during Caesar's consulship, the previous year, the 59 BC, he received from the Senate the title of king and friend, since his way of showing his gratitude was to refuse an invitation to a conference for the discussion of matters affecting their common interest. The envoys were instructed to deliver him an ultimatum. So this is Caesar's ultimatum to Ariovistus after he had declined the summit. It says, first, he was not to bring any more large bodies of men across the Rhine into Gaul. Secondly, he was to restore the Aeduan hostages he held and to authorize the Sequani to restore those whom they held. Finally, he was not to oppress the Aedui or to make war on them or their allies. On these conditions, Caesar and the Roman government would maintain cordial and friendly relations with him. If these demands were refused, then, in accordance with a decree of the Senate passed in the consulship of Marcus Messala and Marcus Piso, 61 BC, directing all governors of the province of Gaul to do everything consistent with the public interest to protect the Aedui and other Roman allies, Caesar would not fail to punish his ill treatment of them. End quote. So Caesar's beginning to lay the law down a bit there. An ultimatum. Okay, Ariovistus, you won't meet me to talk in a civilized manner about things, hammer things out, strike a deal. You can usually strike a deal with Caesar, or often you can. Caesar's saying that, okay, so you're not prepared to do that, then you've got to do this, this, and this, or it's the sword. And they're sort of conditions that Ariovistus is unlikely to agree to, as well. That's another classic thing throughout history. If you want to fight people, you want to take their land, and you want things to come to a head, come to blows. You really want to have battles and war with someone, but you don't want to look like the aggressor. You don't want to look like you're simply being a Genghis Khan type pitiless warlord, invading and killing people for the sake of it. If you don't want to appear to be that, what you can do is send your enemy a set of requests, quote unquote, requests, which are actually demands, and they're demands that they cannot accept. Again, I think of World War One springs to mind, when the Austro-Hungarians send the Serbians a set of requests, which are in fact really demands that the Serbians could never really agree to. Or when the parliamentarian forces in the English Civil War send the royal forces requests, which basically say, give up the crown. They could never agree to that. That's the whole point of what's going on here. Could never agree to it. So it's war. So you get what you want. It looks like the other side are being unreasonable and the aggressors, but actually you've just completely forced their hand. Caesar again, quote, in reply, Ariovistus said that it was the recognised custom of war for victors to rule the vanquished in any way they pleased, and that the Romans acted on this principle by governing their conquered subjects, not according to the dictates of any third party, but at their own discretion. Ariovistus is like, stop messing with me. Ugh, leave me alone. Get away. Like, I can do whatever I want. That's how it works. Who do you think you are? Since he did not dictate to them how they were to exercise their rights, he ought not to be interfered with in the exercise of his. It was because the Aedui had tried the fortune of war and were the losers in the fight that they had to pay him tribute, and Caesar was doing him a serious wrong in coming to Gaul and causing him a loss of revenue. Yeah, already Caesar and the Romans are sort of costing him money in tribute. And, you're messing with my money now. That's a thing as old as time, right? As well, isn't it? When people, all sorts of people, on a personal level and on a national and even international level, will put up with all sorts of insults and injustices. But when it messes with your money, when it messes with your wallet, it's like, okay, that's the end of the line. Okay, I've had it now. You're not taking money out of my pocket. I'll put up with humiliation, but not being poorer. The account again. He, Ariovistus, would not return the hostages of the Aedui, but would refrain from making any wanton attack upon them or their allies if they kept their agreement and paid the tributes regularly every year. If they did not, the title of Brothers of the Roman People would not save them from the consequences. I am not impressed, he concluded, by Caesar's threat to punish my oppression of these people. No one has ever fought me without bringing destruction upon himself. Let him attack whenever he pleases. He will discover what German valour is capable of. We have never known defeat. We have had superb training in arms, and for 14 years have never sheltered beneath a roof. End quote. So that's an interesting line there. People have pointed to that a few times and said, it's interesting, Ariovistus isn't completely ignoring Caesar and who Caesar is and what he represents. He's conceded a few things there. He has said, even though he's threatened him, he has said, all right, I won't take any more hostages. How about that? So he's compromised on some level. All right, as long as they keep paying their tribute in full, I won't take any more hostages. How about that? So he's conceding. He's not conceding very much, but he's conceding a bit. So in the Mongol era, when anyone was foolhardy enough to send the Mongols any sort of ultimatum, the Caliph of Baghdad, for example, if you ever sent the Mongols any sort of ultimatum, it would always come back, no. Every single point you've asked us, we won't do one tiny iota of it. And in fact, now you're on our list and we're going to come and destroy you, every single last one of you. Right? That's how the Mongols dealt with things. So you can see Ariovistus isn't quite that hardline. He at least does recognise Caesar and the Romans on some level as being a power he should be wary of. But not that much, right? Because then he goes on straight on to say, if you want war, though, bring it on. Right? He says, let him attack whenever he pleases. He's literally almost goading Caesar. Saying, we're badass warriors. Saying we haven't sheltered under a roof for years and years. Right? Saying we live outside. We're hardy. We're harder than you. We're undefeated. Right? You're not undefeated. The Romans, you're not undefeated. Bring it on then. If you won't accept this small concession I'm offering you, then bring it on. Well, anyone who knows anything knows it's probably not a best idea to goad Caesar when it comes to having battles. So the narrative continues, quote, At the very moment when this message was being reported to Caesar, delegations arrived from the Aedui and the Treveri. The Aedui came to complain that the Herudes, the Germans, who had lately crossed into Gaul, were ravaging their territory, and that even the surrender of hostages had failed to induce Ariovistus to leave them in peace. The Treveri stated that 100 clans of the Suebi are Germans again, the Treveri Gauls, Suebi Germans, had encamped on the bank of the Rhine and were trying to cross under the command of Nasua and his brother Cimberius. Caesar was much perturbed by this news and decided that he must act immediately, classic Caesar, lest, if this fresh horde of Suebi joined forces with Ariovistus's veteran troops, it might become more difficult to resist them. Accordingly, he arranged for a supply of grain as quickly as he could and advanced at top speed towards Ariovistus. End quote. Oh, it's on now. It's on now. Ariovistus goaded Caesar, and Caesar's up for it. Once Caesar drops the clutch, puts it in gear, and throws his foot to the floor, you better run and hide. That's all there is to it.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.